My cheating wife, leaving me for her wealthy lover, sneered with disdain. You're a broke loser. My name is Liam Foster. I'm 37 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in the outskirts of a small town. My life was ordinary, nothing extravagant, just a steady routine. I grew up in a modest household, raised by a father who worked as a mechanic, and I followed in his footsteps for a while. My dream was never grandiose. I simply wanted a life of stability. I enlisted in the military at 18, where I worked as an electrician, gaining skills that would eventually lead me back to civilian life. When I returned home, I took a job as a garbage collector. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I was married to Sarah, the woman I thought I'd grow old with. We had a daughter, Ava, who was the light of my life. For all intents and purposes, things were good. I had a steady job, a family, and the hope that one day I might open my own business. But I had no idea that in the span of a single evening, everything would come crashing down. It was a Friday night when it all began. I was at the local bar nursing a beer, trying to relax after a long week of work. Then my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Her voice on the other end was strange, shaky. Something was off. She asked me to come home immediately. I could sense the urgency in her tone, and I didn't waste a second. I left the bar and rushed back to the house. I arrived just as the clock hit 5:27 p.m., the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the driveway. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. Sarah was standing in the living room, her expression unreadable, and Ava was sitting on the couch, her face void of emotion. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I looked at them. "Liam, we need to talk," Sarah said. There was no warmth in her voice, no tenderness that I was accustomed to. It was as if the woman I had been with for 16 years was someone else entirely. I glanced at Ava, giving her a faint smile. She didn't return it. Instead, she looked away, avoiding my gaze. The sting of that was sharper than any physical blow. Something wasn't right. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Liam," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Ava and I, we're leaving." I froze. I couldn't process her words at first. "Leaving? Where are you going?" "I'm divorcing you," she stated matter-of-factly. The words were like a punch to my gut. I staggered back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it all. "You'll get the papers soon. I just wanted to tell you myself." I turned to look at Ava, hoping, praying, that she would say something, anything to show me that she still cared. But she remained silent, her eyes cast downward. It was as if the world was crumbling around me, and my daughter was too numb to even acknowledge the wreckage. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice trembling with both anger and fear. If they were leaving, it had to be because of someone else. There had to be another man. "It's Ethan," Sarah replied, her eyes not meeting mine. I felt the anger bubbling inside me, hot and fierce. Ethan, a man who had everything I didn't. He was wealthy, successful, everything I wasn't. And now, it seemed, he was the reason my family was torn apart. "You're leaving me for money?" I asked, bitterness seeping into every word. "For someone who can provide you with a life I couldn't?" I turned to Ava, desperate for some sign that she hadn't been swayed by the lure of wealth. "Ava, don't you have anything to say? I'm your father." "Dad, please," she said softly, her voice breaking. "This isn't the time. You're really going to let her leave with him?" I demanded, my voice rising in frustration. "You're just going to abandon me for a man's money? Do you really think that's what matters?" Ava didn't answer. She stood up, her face flushed with tears, and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind her, leaving Sarah and me alone. For a long moment, there was silence. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest, and the weight of Sarah's betrayal hung heavy in the air. I turned to face her, my voice cold. "Have you been with him?" "While I was here, working my ass off just to keep us afloat." She hesitated before answering. "Yes, Liam, I have been. And it's not just about the money. Ethan, he sees me. He understands me in ways you never did." Those words, spoken with such finality, felt like a blade slicing through me. My wife, the woman I devoted my life to, had found someone who could give her everything I couldn't. It wasn't just the money, it was something deeper. And I couldn't blame her. Not really. Sarah grabbed her purse and stood up, her eyes cold and distant. "I'm sorry, Liam. I really am. But this is the only way." I watched as she walked out of the door, leaving me standing in the empty house, the walls echoing with the silence of a family shattered. It felt like the world had been ripped away, leaving only the hollow remnants of what once was. The divorce papers came the next day, along with the realization that everything we had worked for, everything we had built together, was gone. I signed the papers without a second thought. There was no point in fighting anymore. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. The following days passed in a blur of empty nights and cold mornings. I moved into a tiny studio apartment, closer to the garbage collection site where I worked. It wasn't much, but it was mine. With only $11,000 in my bank account and no responsibilities to Sarah or Ava, I started to feel a strange sense of freedom. I didn't know what to do with myself, but I was determined to survive. A few weeks later, I ran into Ben, an old friend from the military, at the bar. He had heard about the divorce, and though he meant well, I could see the pity in his eyes. I wasn't in the mood to wallow, but he insisted we go for a drink. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, looking me over. "I mean, she left you for a rich guy. That's gotta sting." "Yeah, it does," I said, taking a long sip of my beer. "But I'm not just angry anymore, Ben. I'm tired. I'm tired of being second-rate to everyone." "Well, maybe it's time for a change," Ben suggested, slapping me on the back. "Come on, let's go have some fun tonight. Just forget about everything for a while." I agreed, figuring it was time to stop sulking. A few drinks wouldn't hurt. It was a Friday night and the bar was buzzing with people, but I wasn't really there. My mind was still racing with thoughts of Sarah and Ethan. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see their faces, see them living the life I had always dreamed of. But then, something unexpected happened. I spotted Amanda, a coworker from the garbage collection job, sitting alone at the bar. She was looking at her phone, seemingly deep in thought. I hadn't paid much attention to her before. She was just another face at work. But tonight, there was something different about her. Maybe it was her energy, or maybe it was the way she looked at me when she noticed me staring at her from across the room. "Hey, Liam," she called out, giving me a smile that was too friendly to be casual. "You're not married anymore, right?" I raised an eyebrow, surprised at her directness. "Yeah, I'm divorced." "Good," she said, laughing lightly. "Then maybe you're up for a drink with me?" I didn't hesitate. I walked over, sat down beside her, and ordered a whiskey. For the first time in weeks, I felt a slight spark of something other than anger or despair. Amanda was easy to talk to, and as the night went on, I found myself forgetting about my problems. We had a great time, talking and laughing about anything and everything. When we left the bar, Amanda invited me to her place to continue the fun. "Just a heads up," she warned me as we walked to her car. "I'm not looking for anything serious, just two adults having a good time." "I'm good with that," I replied, smirking. Amanda's apartment was cozy, and I felt strangely at home there. It wasn't like being with Sarah, it was different, more carefree, less complicated. After a quick shower, we went to a late-night diner to grab a bite before returning to her place. For the first time in a long time, I felt normal. I could almost forget about everything that had happened. That night, we shared a kiss. It wasn't anything too serious, but it was the first kiss I had shared with someone who wasn't Sarah in 16 years. Amanda's touch was comforting, but more importantly, it was the reminder I needed that life went on, despite what had been taken from me. Over the next few weeks, Amanda and I continued to see each other. She was a breath of fresh air. For the first time in a long time, I started to look forward to something other than work. We went on dates, laughed, and I began to feel a bit like my old self again. But there was still something gnawing at me, something that felt unfinished. The more I spent time with Amanda, the more I realized I wanted more than just a rebound. I didn't know if I was ready to fully move on, but I wasn't going to keep dragging my feet either. I had spent far too long feeling sorry for myself. One night, while we were sitting in a booth at Bob's Big Boy, I made a decision. I had enough of being stuck. I was going to take a risk. "Amanda," I said, surprising even myself, "I'm quitting my job tomorrow. I'm going to start my own business." She looked at me, genuinely surprised. "What kind of business?" "Electronics," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. "I'm going to open my own repair and installation service. No need for a shop, just a 24-hour hotline and some tools. I've got the skills. I've been waiting for years, and it's time to do something about it." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing what I said. Then she smiled. "I think it's great, but are you sure about this? I mean, are you ready?" "Ready or not, it's happening," I replied with a grin. I went into work the next day, handed in my 2 weeks' notice, and started planning. No more collecting garbage. No more feeling inferior. I was going to make my own way on my own terms. The first few months were slow, but steady. I focused on quality, delivering great service to a few clients here and there. Then, luck struck. One of my old army buddies, Jerry, reached out to me with an unexpected offer. He had a friend, Lionel Tandy, a private investigator who needed help with his surveillance equipment. Lionel was busy, and he was willing to send clients my way if I could provide the services. The job requests started pouring in. I worked harder than I ever had in my life, taking on as many projects as I could handle. By the end of the first year, my income had doubled. By the second year, it had quadrupled. My business was thriving, and with it, my confidence. But there was one thing I couldn't shake: the thought of Sarah and Ava. It had been over a year since they left, but I still hadn't heard from them. Not a single call or message. My anger had faded, replaced by something else: emptiness. It was as if I had been erased from their lives entirely. Then, one evening, as I was finishing up a job, I received a call that shook me to my core. The phone call was from my daughter, Ava. My heart nearly stopped as I heard her voice on the other end. It had been over a year since I'd last seen her, and hearing from her now felt surreal, like a part of me had been resurrected. "Dad." Her voice was shaky, uncertain. It sounded like she hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. "Ava, is it really you?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it's me," she replied, a long pause hanging between us. I wanted to talk. Is that okay?" The lump in my throat grew larger. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected this, not after everything that had happened. After Sarah's betrayal and Ava's silence, I didn't know if I could trust this moment. But I couldn't ignore her. "Of course it's okay," I said. I've been waiting for you to reach out." "Where are you?" "I'm at the apartment," she said, sounding hesitant. I want to see you, Dad. I miss you. The words hit me like a freight train. She missed me, despite everything that had happened, despite the choices she made, despite the life they were living with Ethan. She still cared. That was the thread of hope I had been clinging to, though I didn't realize it until now. I'll be there, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I didn't know what this reunion would look like, what I was supposed to say, or how to act. But I knew one thing. Seeing my daughter again was a moment I couldn't let slip away. When I arrived at her apartment, I didn't recognize the building at first. It was a small complex on the outskirts of the city, far from the fancy homes I imagined Sarah and Ethan would live in. My heart twisted as I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. Ava was standing by the door when I knocked, her face a little older, a little more worn, but her eyes were still those of the little girl I had once known. "Dad?" she whispered, almost as if she couldn't believe I was standing there. I pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in over a year, I felt something close to peace. "I've missed you, sweetheart." "I've missed you too," she replied, her voice breaking as she pulled away. We sat down in the small living room, and I realized how much time had passed. It had been so long since we'd sat together, talked together, just been together. But things had changed. Ava wasn't the girl I remembered. She was growing up, becoming her own person. I'm sorry, Dad," Ava said, avoiding my gaze. "I know I hurt you. I didn't mean to. I didn't know what else to do. Mom said I had to choose." "You chose him over me?" I said, the words bitter on my tongue. It wasn't what I wanted to say, but it was the truth. You chose him, and that hurt. I don't know how to forgive you for that. "I never wanted to hurt you," she replied, her eyes starting to well up. "I thought you'd be fine without me, Dad. Mom, she needed me. I didn't know what else to do." My heart softened as I watched her, her pain mirroring my own. She wasn't the villain in this story. I had to remind myself of that. "You're not the enemy, Ava," I said quietly. "But you still hurt me. I was your father. I'm still your father. And you abandoned me. Because of him." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. "It wasn't just about him. It was about everything. Mom always said you didn't need me anymore, that you'd be fine. But now I see that I was wrong. I see that you needed me. I'm sorry, Dad. I really am." The words stung, but they also started to heal something inside me. She hadn't chosen him because she didn't love me. She had chosen him because she didn't know how to choose me when she was so torn between us. "I don't know what to say," I said, wiping my eyes. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can fix this." Ava shook her head. "We don't have to fix everything today. But I want to try. I want to be your daughter again, Dad. And I want you to be my dad, too." That moment, sitting there in that small apartment with my daughter, I realized something. I wasn't alone anymore. Despite everything, despite Sarah's betrayal and Ethan's wealth, I had my daughter back. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was something. "I want that too," I said softly, looking at her. "I want to try." The days that followed were filled with awkward reunions, tentative conversations, and painful truths. Ava was still living with Sarah and Ethan, but she had made it clear she wanted to be part of my life again. She wasn't sure how things would work between us, but she was willing to try. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. But even as I made peace with my daughter, my mind couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. I couldn't shake the thought of Sarah. She was still in my life, but it was different now. The animosity between us had softened over time, but it was clear we could never go back. The damage had been done. Still, I hadn't heard from her in months. One day, as I was finishing up a job, the phone rang. It was a call I hadn't expected, and it was from her. When I saw Sarah's name flash across my phone, I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't sure what to expect. It had been so long since I'd heard from her. The last time we spoke, she had been with Ethan, her new life taking shape with someone else. But this call felt different. I didn't know why, but I felt a tight knot in my chest as I answered. "Liam." Sarah's voice crackled through the line. There was an edge to it, a nervousness that made me sit up straighter. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" I was silent for a moment. My first instinct was to hang up, to pretend like nothing had changed, to keep living my life as if she didn't exist. But then I thought of Ava. What if this had something to do with her? What if Sarah was finally going to admit the mistakes she had made? "Where do you want to meet?" I asked, my voice guarded. "Same place as last time," she said, and I knew exactly where she meant. The diner where we had our last heated argument, the one where everything had fallen apart. I agreed, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. When I arrived, Sarah was already sitting at a booth in the back, her face drawn, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her. She looked tired, more so than I remembered. It wasn't the same confident woman who had walked away from our marriage. This was someone different, someone who had been worn down by life's consequences. I slid into the seat across from her. "What do you want, Sarah?" She took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm sorry, Liam. I know I've hurt you, and I can't take back what I did. But I need you to understand something, what happened between us. It wasn't just about Ethan or the money." I stared at her, disbelief flashing across my face. "Then what was it about, Sarah? You left me for a man who had everything I didn't. You chose him over me and Ava." Her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't about what Ethan had," she said, her voice breaking. "It was about feeling invisible. I felt like I was just a shadow in our marriage. You were so focused on your work, on making ends meet, that you didn't see me anymore. I thought maybe he could fill that emptiness. But I was wrong. I made a mistake. I was selfish, and now I see that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't just apologizing for the affair. She was apologizing for the years of neglect, for the way she had felt abandoned in our marriage. I could feel the anger and betrayal surge inside me, but there was something else there, too. Something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for a long time. Sympathy. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah," I said softly. "You tore apart our family. You took my daughter from me." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. I never expected forgiveness. But I need you to know that Ava," she's struggling, "Liam, she needs you more than ever. And I need you to consider giving us a chance to make things right." The pain in her voice was unmistakable. It had been a long time since I'd seen Sarah so vulnerable, so broken. She wasn't the woman who had walked out on me. She was a woman who had paid the price for her choices. "I'm not sure I can do that," I said, my voice low. "I can't just forget what happened. I can't just forgive you and pretend everything's fine." "I don't expect you to," Sarah replied. "But I'm asking for a chance for her, for Ava. I can't fix what I broke, but maybe you can." I sat back in the booth, my mind racing. Ava was caught in the middle of all of this. She had chosen to live with Sarah and Ethan, but the reality was that she still had a father. She still needed me, even if she hadn't fully realized it yet. "I've been doing my best to move on," I said, my voice heavy. "I've started a business. I found someone who cares about me. Amanda. She's been there for me through all of this." Sarah's face softened. I can see that. Amanda's a good woman. You deserve to be happy, Liam. But I need you to know that Ava doesn't have the luxury of time. She's not a child anymore. She's growing up, and she needs you, both of you. I don't want to stand in the way anymore. I looked at Sarah, really looked at her for the first time in months. She wasn't the same woman who had betrayed me. She was someone who had been through hell and was just trying to survive. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said again, my voice quieter now. But I'll try. For Ava. That's all I can promise. Sarah smiled faintly, relief washing over her face. That's all I'm asking for. Just a chance. A chance to make things right. We sat in silence for a while, both of us lost in our thoughts. Eventually, I stood up. I have to go, but I'll talk to Ava. We'll figure something out. As I walked out of the diner, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the happy ending I had hoped for, but it was something. The wounds were still there, and I didn't know if they would ever fully heal. But I had my daughter back in my life, and that was all that mattered. That night, as I sat with Amanda at home, I told her everything. She listened quietly, understanding without judgment. When I was done, she took my hand. You're doing the right thing, she said softly. For Ava, for yourself. You can't change the past, but you can choose how you move forward. I nodded. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. I had been broken, torn apart, but I was still standing. And no matter what happened with Sarah, with Ava, or with anything else, I was going to rebuild my life. A week passed before I finally got up the courage to talk to Ava again. Our last meeting had left me feeling conflicted, torn between the daughter I loved and the woman who had walked out of my life. The anger that I'd buried for so long began to resurface as I thought about everything. Sarah's betrayal, Ethan's role in our downfall, and how much pain I had allowed myself to wallow in. But the truth was, I hadn't fully moved on. Not just from Sarah, but from the expectations I had placed on myself as a father. I had allowed the past to define me for too long. The past was like a broken record playing over and over in my mind, but I was starting to hear a new tune, a tune that belonged to the future. One evening, after a long day at work, I got a call from Amanda. She sounded serious, her voice calm but filled with an urgency I couldn't ignore. Liam, she said, there's something I think you should know. It's about Sarah and Ethan. I sat up straight, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. What about them? There's something Sarah hasn't told you, she continued. She didn't just leave you for Ethan's money. There's more to the story, and it's something that might change everything. What do you mean? I asked, my heart racing. She didn't just fall in love with him. Ethan had a hand in your downfall, Liam. He knew about the financial struggles you were facing, and he used that against you. He made sure Sarah believed you, couldn't provide for her, that you couldn't give her the life she deserved. I was speechless for a moment. The idea that Ethan had orchestrated part of my downfall was something I had never considered. It made sense, though everything had felt too calculated, too clean. I'd always thought that Sarah's leaving was just a result of her desire for a better life. But this was different. There had been manipulation at play. Why didn't she tell me this? I asked, feeling a sting of betrayal from Sarah, even though she had already left me. Amanda sighed. She didn't want to hurt you more, Liam. She's ashamed of how she handled everything. But I think you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to know that you weren't the problem. Ethan was. That truth hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years blaming myself for everything that had gone wrong. I thought I was the one who had failed, that I wasn't good enough. But the truth was, I had been manipulated, betrayed, not just by Sarah, but by Ethan as well. He had come into my life like a shadow, pretending to be everything I wasn't, playing on my insecurities and tearing my family apart. I hung up the phone with Amanda, my mind reeling from the revelation. It was late, and I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, stuck between the past and the future. I needed to talk to Ava. She deserved the truth, too. The next day, I met with her at a small cafe we used to go to. It was a neutral place, a place where we could sit and talk without the weight of the past hanging over us. "Dad," Ava said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had before, but I want to try. I want to know who you are again." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I don't know if I can ever go back to who I was either, Ava, but I'm here, and I'm trying. I need you to know that it wasn't just you who was hurt. I was hurt too. By your mom, by Ethan, by everything." She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know, Dad. No, and I'm sorry, but I want to help you. I want to help fix things. I want to know who you are now." And just like that, I realized that the life I had been trying to rebuild wasn't about going back to the past. It was about moving forward with the people who still cared about me. Amanda had stood by me through everything, and now Ava was ready to try again. But there was still one more piece of the puzzle left. Sarah. I needed to talk to her one more time. The lies, the betrayal, and the anger had all clouded my vision. But now I could see clearly. I didn't need to forgive her to move on, but I needed to hear her say the truth. When I called her, her voice was shaky, unsure. But when I asked her to meet, she didn't hesitate. We met at the same diner, the place where everything had fallen apart. But now it was the place where I was going to make my peace. "I know what you didn't tell me," I said quietly, looking at her across the table. "I know about Ethan, what he did to me, what he did to our family." Sarah's face drained of color. She didn't say anything at first, but her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Liam," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know what to do. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't." I nodded slowly. "I know, and I understand now. I just wish you would have told me sooner." "I never wanted to hurt you," Sarah said, her voice breaking. I thought Ethan was my way out, but I was wrong. And now I'm paying for it." We sat there for a while, the silence between us heavier than I'd ever felt before. But then, I realized something. This was it. This was the last conversation I needed to have. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about closure. And with that closure, I could finally move on. "I'm not angry anymore, Sarah," I said quietly. "I've moved on. And so have you, haven't you?" She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I have. And I'm sorry for everything I did." And just like that, the story ended, not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with a kind of peace I didn't expect. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing the truth and accepting it, from seeing the future not as a place where I could undo the past, but as a place where I could build something better. And as I walked out of the diner, I knew it wasn't the end of my journey. It was just the beginning of something new.